Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about episode 4 of Jupiter's Legacy. A lot of interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. We get to spend a lot more time with Chloe in this particular episode, and I think it's kind of an interesting thing. Once again, the parallels that they kind of draw, like obviously last episode we had Hutch and George. This episode we're getting Chloe and Sheldon, so I think that's kind of an interesting thing. But the fact is that for Chloe, obviously that partying lifestyle and everything, and it's just honestly her just trying to feel some emptiness inside of her. Just, she's sadly, you see it more and more as the episode progresses, that she's just kind of broken. And when you kind of realize, like, first and foremost, like, anyone that was a friend to her, that it was a part of, like, for her, like, there's a level of resentment she has towards the people who are part of that superhero world. It's because it's a reminder of the world she's a part of, but for her, it's like she feels like she's not good enough for that world. So it's a situation of, like, it's a combination of self-loathing and just kind of lashing out at them just because of her own kind of self-resentment and stuff like that. Just because it's also like, because the self-resentment for her comes from her dad, like, just never feeling like who she is never good enough. She can never just be herself. Like, there's a standard she's supposed to be, because she's supposed to be like, oh, we are, especially our family, like, should be the pinnacle of, like, what we're supposed to be. And, like, growing up like that, it kind of took its toll on her. Because, once again, it's like, to everyone else, the people that were once her friend, how, like I said, how she looks at them, but how they look at her. They look at her as like, oh, like, as Sierra calls her out, it's like, oh, for one, Ruby calls her out for not being at the funeral. Then Sierra calls her out for not being there at the actual fight. It's like no one's trying to understand her issue, because I think for them, it's like, you have the great, like, superhero parents, like, that should be enough for you, because literally everyone else wants to jump at being a part of the union. They feel this pride in it, whereas she just feels kind of disgust and hatred towards the whole superhero angle. But while she's partying, she meets a dude, Nick, where she immediately thinks, like, oh, you just want me because of my dad and my mom. It's like, I'm not trying to get into your mom's pants, nor your dad's pants. So she kind of appreciates that, because I think that's another angle to it. She's a celebrity, essentially. You're like the child of one of, like, the top superheroes in the world, or at least, the very least, in America. So you're already a celebrity in your own right, because you are a hero, but you're also, well, you have powers and everything, but you're famous, but you're also, like, got that element of, right, you're also famous because you're a superhero's kid. So it's like, how do you trust that any relationship that you have is actually based off of sincerity and not just someone using you because of your connections of who your parents are? But Nick doesn't seem like he is that case. And obviously, he's like, hey, let's go drink up everyone's booze and then, like, bail before they have to pay for it. And so obviously they're all doing drugs and stuff like that. There's Jana, Jaina. It's like, yeah, they kind of go back. So she's the one that's kind of like the most still, like, friends on the best terms with Chloe, whereas everyone else, like Ruby and Sierra, aren't. Like, everyone else is just kind of like giving her guff. Some of the other, like, Ruby and Sierra are the ones that kind of give the most guff. Everyone else is just kind of fine. But the reason why, like, Janet kind of sticks up for Chloe, because I was like, yeah, Chloe stuck up for me because I was a late bloomer. Most of everyone around them got their powers when they were kids. She was like, I was a late bloomer, but Chloe defended me. She beat up anyone that, stood in the way of anyone that bothered me until my powers, came to term. That's interesting. But during the fight with Sierra, I thought that was going to get super heated until Nick steps in and basically he has a power over time. It's like, she's like, wait, she's like, you've got powers? He's like, yeah, I thought you knew that. Like, I'm Nick of time. And it's like, she's like, God, that name's terrible. And they just kind of leave and go back to her place and partying it up. And, she kind of talks about, because the fact is that she just doesn't get why so many people are, what was it? That aspect of, like, having who you are be defined by so many other people. Because if it's not being defined by her dad, she herself, it's like she can't just be herself. She has to be defined by other people. And it's just like, you just can't be you. And for her, that's what kind of bothers her the most about. Because everyone else makes her feel like that, but the person that shouldn't make her feel like that, her dad, who should just accept her as being her, is like, no, you have to be this. You have to be what I want you to be. And it's just like, I'm sure we're seeing it more and more with his past, but I think there's more and more reasons why the code and that standard and that ideal exists, and I think there's probably going to be a darker reason for it that he hasn't opened up to them about, and I think that's going to lean into why he pushes them so hard. You know, he pushes them in different ways. Like, the way he treats Brandon is not the way he treats Chloe. It's still not the most... Neither way's a very father of the year way of handling parenting. I mean, everyone's got their own way, but it's just like, he just doesn't go about things the best way. I mean, his daughter's kind of a mess partially because of him, you know, because she feels like lost because it's like, me being me isn't enough, like, and it should be. And, you know, Nick is telling her that it's okay, like, you should basically just be you. Like, you shouldn't have to live your life kind of being dictated by what people define you as or what people expect of you or think who you should be. So they do their thing, which I was actually also surprised where it's like, oh, he has superhuman strength too, because I was wondering, like, does everyone kind of have superhuman strength that's like a baseline? That's like the baseline all across the board superhero ability, plus you got your specialties like on top of it. The fact is he can freeze time, but also like he does seem pretty durable, and he's got some superhero strength the way he was like pushing her into the wall and cracking it. So do their thing. She wakes up, she's late for work, and it's like, oh yeah, new name, shouldn't call me Time Warp, blah blah blah. And then the ball drops, well, the other shoe drops when it's like, oh yeah, so yeah, I'm actually trying to reapply for the union. And you're like, and there we go. So this whole thing, he's playing nice. He even said like, oh, I'm not trying to get into your dad's pants or your mom's pants. It's like, oh, I'm just trying to get into your pants so that you can put in a favor with your mom and dad. And it's like, and there we go. For her, she goes, right. And he's like, you know, it's like, I don't even want to, you know, it's kind of messed up to say this now. And she's like, go ahead. He's like, you think you can put in a word? She's like, oh, you want me to talk to my dad? He's like, no, you didn't have to talk to someone like so high up or whatever. And she's like, okay. And it's like, oh, my dad's going to want to know if you can take a punch. She's like, yeah, this one time with a truck, and she punches him, knocks him through the wall, and he falls and lands on what sounds like a car on the street below. So, and she was just kind of like frustrated because I think it was like for a second, I liked you and I thought that what we had was kind of neat, but it's like, nope, you were just using me. I had my suspicions and I should just listen to myself, but also probably the annoyance of the fact that she didn't. I was about to say, like, is she concerned that she killed him? It's like, nah, she's kind of moving on because she knows he can probably take a hit. I mean, that's why she was kind of asking, like, considering the sex and everything. It's like, he can take a hit. The thing's probably got a little rough during set, so it's like, nah, he'll be fine. So she shows up at work. She's kind of a mess, and she's supposed to do this shoot, and obviously she's getting high the entire time. It's just like she's falling apart. She's doing everything to kind of keep up this appearance, keep up this front, while she's just like she's legitimately just broken on the inside, and it's heartbreaking just to see that descent further and further and just get worse and worse as the episode goes on. And I'm sure it's just been like that, a steady decline the entire time. It's just, there's a lot of shit she's not really dealing with, and it's just like, for her, it's probably a thing of like, how can I deal with it, you know? Because that was also another angle to it. It's just kind of like, well, that comes up later on. I'll get to it soon enough. But because she talks about that more specifically, the you not being enough with Jana later on, because it's like Brandon wants to be dad, and Jana, you want to be my mom, and like in, you know, status wise amongst the unit, and it's like, it doesn't matter. Like, you're always gonna have to be someone else. Like, you being you is just never enough, you know. And when you kind of like when you have to like basically lose who you are just to kind of fit this superhero role, it's understandable, because it's like, calls like a crisis of identity on so many different levels. Like, from her perspective of being, you know, the children of Lady Liberty and Utopia, and also, you know, finding your own place in the world, but so much of your life is supposed to be a certain way because everyone expects you to be this thing because of who your parents are, and they're expecting you to be a certain thing. Your dad in particular, and he kind of pokes and prods and kind of, as she says, attacks and just kind of shoots down everything she does, because like, nothing I do is good enough. So it's like, because you saying that makes me feel like I'm not good enough. You make me feel like I'm not good enough on a regular basis, and the fact is her dad can't realize that is kind of like the frustrating thing for her. But at the photo shoot, it's kind of like, okay, she's like, I'm about to leave. It's like, no, they want you to do one more. It's like, do this superhero pose. It's like, wait, what? Which for me, I think is the dumbest thing. You know she hates this. Why would you piss her off about bringing up the superhero stuff? That should be like a clear, no, how she feels about it. And it's like, yeah, we want to do this because it'd be nostalgic. It's like, no, and they're like, okay, you're not a superhero, but at very least, you can pretend for 5 minutes or whatever. That way you can make enough money to kind of put it up your nose. She's like, okay, lifts up the car, throws it at the lady, and it's like, oh, that did actually make me feel better, and kind of walks away. Granted, she gets chewed out about it later on, because it's like, oh, they dropped you. That's the last endorsement we have, because you kind of basically screwed over everyone else, and they're not going to work with you. And we decided we're going to drop you. And I like how that cuts in with like, okay, so then we see like, right, this is Chloe's side of things from that experience last episode when like Hutch ran the van into her. And so she picked up the bag. I was wondering like what she did with it. And it's like, oh, she basically snorted it. And I'm like, we don't know what that's going to do to you. Oh, really quickly, I should also note, I think it's kind of a fascinating thing. Something was crossing my mind. I was like, because it seems like drugs hit her the same way it would any normal human being. So I thought that was fascinating. Because sometimes they'll work around that superhero-wise. Like, a great example would be like Barry, the Flash. At least the show talks about it. I don't know if this is covered in the comics. But because of his speed, his metabolism moves so fast, he can't get drunk. Because his metabolism, like, basically clears the alcohol out of his body. Like, he can't drink fast enough to keep a buzz, essentially. Because his body just filters it out that fast because of his metabolism being super fast. So I was wondering kind of a similar thing happening. It's like, nah, drugs hit her just like any other person. But I was wondering, like, okay, regular drugs does. It's like, we have no idea what this is. The big guy wanted it bad enough that the fact is he was willing to steal it. It's like, it had to be super important. It's like, oh, and Chloe's just casually, like, sniffing it like it's just Coke or something. It's like, that's crazy. She invites people over for a party. Like, the dude who owns the building comes in and is like, get out. And it's like, oh, yo, can you handle that? And, like, one of her friends reverses, like, time and kind of, like, repairs the wall. And it's like, now leave before she reverses something else. He's like, yeah. Well, I mean, you guys keep going. And, yeah, thanks. Just keep it down. People are trying to sleep. So it's kind of like, yeah, probably don't want to piss off people with superpowers. It's like, because he didn't realize who he was stepping to. I don't know if he knows who Chloe is in the sense of like, that's also like something of like, yeah, obviously like she's big enough to know, but it's probably a thing of like, he didn't realize probably like everyone else in that party is most likely superpowered. So, but she's continuing the party until the point like, like I said, she has that conversation with Jana later on, and for her it's like, I don't have any friends because I'm an asshole, and it's like, and that's what you all really think of me. And so Jana leaves saying like, you're better than this, which Chloe's like, I'm not. And just she goes to her phone and she's about to call her mom, but she can't bring herself to do it because it's like, for her it's like, what's the point? I'm just going to get judged, and it's just going to be like, I'm just going to be more of a disappointment, I'm going to be more of a failure. Like, we don't fully know, because I think for her it's like, what's the point? Because if I call mom, dad's most likely going to be there, and mom's just going to take dad's side in things. Because once again, Brandon takes his side, her mom takes her side. So like, I think for her it's probably like, it feels like she's kind of even more so alone in that regard, even amongst her family. So she just feels like such an outsider because she doesn't want what they want. In particular, doesn't want what her dad wants for her. So she sniffs the last of the blue stuff, and then it finally kicks in. I don't know whether it's just like the overload of how much of this she sniffed. Who knows how much the others sniffed? It's like maybe just the quantity of like just how much she sniffed just finally kicks in. Her nose starts bleeding, and she kind of has seizures, which I was immediately being like, is this related? Is this going to tie in some shape or form to what's happening in the show? Well, in the past and stuff, but we like the TV doing what it did. I don't know whether that was just like the what she sniffed like kicking into her system, whether it was just her having the seizures she was having. Like, who knows what that was? But I don't know if that was just in her head or whether that was like happening to the TV. Like, part of me was wondering, because we still don't know the clear reasons why what happened to Sheldon happened to Sheldon. Like, why it kicked in then of all times. Like, there were earlier signs of it because when he was yelling at Grace at the newspaper, like, that's when his first nosebleed happened. And it's not until the funeral where the like actual full-blown seizures happen. But she falls and she's on the floor, and I'm like, there's no one there to take care of her to make sure she's okay. And lo and behold, who pops in? Hutch. And he's like, well, shit, because, well, to be fair, the biggest guy is dead, so I don't think he has to worry about the bag. Well, not unless this is supposed to... Well, that's the thing. Timeline-wise, not unless this is supposed to insinuate that this is before, like, Hutch went back to the bar. So that was probably him, like, finally tracking Chloe down, and it's like, well, shit. And that probably, like, led to the rest of the episode. I don't know if that's what they're insinuating timeline-wise, or whether this is supposed to be the aftermath, like, at the end of episode 4. But I don't know if this, like I said, I don't know what the timeline frame is supposed to be on that. I would assume, like, he doesn't actually have to drop her off. He has to, like, put it in her hand, hospital, and then bring the, like, thing back to him. But we'll see how things kind of go on that front. I don't think he's going to leave her like that, especially considering, like, it's like, oh, I know you, like, they go back. And so it's kind of a thing of like, he can't just leave her like that. So I think he's going to help regardless. Maybe because of the past and stuff like that, but we'll see. But focusing on the Sheldon's side of things, we see him walking down a road, and this guy's suspicious because it's like, yeah, the last person that tried to like seem like they were going to help us attacked us. But Sheldon's like, I'm just trying to find directions. I just want to help move on. It's like, well, you help us with this flat tire, and and he does, and he brings up the windmill like picture, but none of them realize it. And obviously, once again, he's still seeing his dad, and obviously the guy is telling. It's like, do you have any family or love, a wife or kids waiting for you? And it's like, my brother, and yeah, there was a girl, but for him, it's like, I don't think it's like, you should probably go back to them, because basically insinuating they're there for you when those times are super dark and super rough, like they kind of obviously are for Sheldon. And he's like, yeah, maybe. And so he gets dropped off in town. He uses that guy's phone, and because Chester's like, I want you to call them. I want you to call them, apologize, and go home. And he's trying to say, like, because Sheldon's like, you're just grinding me down bit by bit. It's like, what's the point? He's like, I'm trying to make sure you don't end up like me, not make the same mistakes I did, which is interesting because, like, which we don't know whether to really fully believe that or not. But eventually Sheldon calls Jane and says, I love you, and apologizes, but she's like kind of telling him to come home. But then he gets involved, kind of like that guy was getting attacked and he kind of stepped in, proceeded to get his ass kicked because of it, but still. Then that little girl tells him about the Miller farm, which, interesting enough, that's one of the dudes behind the comic. Well, this is actually like, what's it called? Miller World? It's the whole like, because Netflix is adapting a lot of his comics. But nevertheless, he goes to the farm. Lo and behold, like the moment I saw the picture on the wall, I was like, hey, isn't that Kurtwood Smith? I haven't brought that up, but obviously there are some actors like I recognize here and there. I just haven't really noted it sometimes, but I was like, yo, Kurtwood Smith, that's crazy. Obviously, I think best known for is like Red from That 70s Show. Eric's dad. Regardless, tangents and all that aside, the vision finally led him there, and he's seeing this little boy, and he's like, what's that all about? He goes in there, and obviously the farmer thinks like, oh, you're here from the bank, but he's like, do I really look like I'm from the bank? But then he finds out why he's there. It's like, wait, you've been seeing stuff in your head. It's like, and then for Sheldon, it's like, wait, you have too? And that's the thing, we still never got a full clear. I don't know whether this is supposed to be like a trial or a test, where like after you've experienced something super painful, the trial or test starts, and like it seems like something of like physical and emotional pain has to happen to you to put you in tune, where it's like it makes you a candidate, and that basically these visions are trying to like push and prod and test you. Like maybe that's what the whole Chester angle to it as well, because the farmer talks about his experience that basically he was on like this vessel because he was part of the Navy, and that basically the storm came upon them, the wind and everything, and it just like, it's like for him, it's like we managed to get away and like 4 days out of our way, but it still almost seemed like it was alive because it was following us, which obviously in his own vision, like there's a ship. I don't know whether that ship is supposed to be the one they eventually take in the future. I'd assume. But like there was kind of a storm going on then, so maybe it's kind of a similar thing. Maybe it's supposed to represent like maybe the area he was in, but that doesn't explain everything for Sheldon, because Sheldon got it while he was home. Obviously this happened to the farmer while he was, out part of the Navy, and it seems like when he came back home, nothing was right, and we ultimately Sheldon ends up finding his family's dead bodies like down below. So I'm assuming like he kind of went insane. Once again, I think it's meant to be a test by something or someone. But even him being like, who'd you see? Was it someone close to you? It always ends up being someone close to you. He's like, don't listen to him. They're a liar. So it's like, who did he see? Maybe that's why he killed his family, because he couldn't distinguish between what was real and what was just in his head anymore. So he just kind of went insane. And down below, Sheldon sees that table, and he has a vision of like, everyone that eventually becomes a part of the Union, whether it's, George, Grace, Walt, Fitz, so on and so forth. So it's like it's all there, and he's seeing the clock, and he's hearing like the numbers, which we don't know what they represent. But he finally ends up calling Walt, and it's like, yeah, I want to go home. So I don't know whether it's a thing of like, because he saw what happened to the farmer, it's like, I'm gonna go home and just forget all this, or whether he feels like he needs to go back home to get fully started on this. It's going to be interesting to see how, because the thing is, going back home might be the mistake, because his voice is telling him to go home, and maybe that and supposed to imply you shouldn't go home. We'll see, because he did have like the vision of his clock, that pocket watch that was his dad that he had, so it's like maybe that's kind of a sign of like going back, like maybe that's going to be a key thing going forward with all this. I don't know. So obviously we know that George was working on the puzzle on his angle side of things. Maybe he figured something out. I don't know. I'm interested to see. I should also note, I think it's so fascinating the way they've gone about that, because I think because of the trailer, and because that's like the first thing we see from the trailer, I just kind of assumed that like, oh, that was going to be something early on in the season, that's actually where we start, that we saw their origin story, and then we got, but it's like, I get the feeling like almost like, and we'll see whether it ends up being the case. Once again, I haven't seen anything past this episode, but I'm curious, is that going to be like whatever happens at the end of this season, that basically the parallel storyline to it is going to be them getting their power, so everything kind of coming full circle in some regard. I would assume that's where that's going, but I have no idea. That's quite fascinating to think about, because like, if that ends up being the case, who knows, like maybe like next episode or maybe the episode after that is when it happens. So it might happen sooner than I think, or it might just be the season finale. But like I said, I went into this thinking I would have expected that to be like episode 1 stuff. I also wasn't expecting them to kind of flash back and forth between times like they do. I mean, I guess it makes sense, because that way, because I don't know. I just think it's kind of interesting bouncing back and forth between the different. And obviously, I haven't commented on it either, but like also like the aspect ratio of like how they film that too. Like obviously the past is like full screen, but then like obviously you get like the aspect ratio changes based on them being present day. So that's also a clear distinction of, without them having to tell you, like they've kind of instilled that in your brain of like, all right, like knowing when and where, like obviously like even before you really get into the scene, the aspect ratio will dictate like, oh, whether we're in the past or present type of thing. So like I said, it's something I hadn't talked about yet, but I just thought it was an interesting thing. It's like it's a pretty obvious element, but I just thought it was just kind of interesting aesthetic choice to kind of do that. But nevertheless, I'm interested to see where all this ends up taking us going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I want to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.